Those born for the burrow still can't fly. How Putin is getting used to the ground and didn't even leave his bunker for a meeting with Xi Jinping. Why did Lukashenko start soiling his pants and begging Zelensky for a meeting? And did Xi Jinping give Putin the order to attack Europe? We'll talk about all this and more briefly and clearly on the Union YouTube channel. First, let's talk about the path from the crane to the mole. Remember how Putin pretended to be a crane? But you can't fool nature. A worm is still a worm, even in a presidential chair, or rather in a bunker. Sticky fear has driven Putin deep underground. He's even afraid of his own people now. He hasn't traveled to Russia's regions for 196 days, which is a record even compared to the COVID era. The last time the Kremlin dictator visited the Russian regions was back on November 6, 2025. At that time, he visited Samara. Since then, according to the publication Agency, Putin has hardly left Moscow, the Moscow region, and St. Petersburg. Journalists specifically note that even during the pandemic, Putin never had such a long pause. Most of the events in 2026 he held either in the Kremlin or in Novo Ogaryovo. According to one version, the Kremlin fears security threats after reports of an alleged attempt to attack Putin's residence in Valdai at the end of last year. He also rarely travels abroad anymore. After his visit to Turkmenistan in 2025, only now has he supposedly left Russia again to see Xi Jinping. Why do I say supposedly? Because most likely it was a double who was sent to bow before Xi. One of the first to point this out was psychologist Dmitry Popov, who said live on Union that what was sent to Xi was a fake, the balding one. Listen.
From May 18th to 20th of this year, we saw what appeared to be three distinct versions of Vladimir Putin. Specifically on the 19th or 18th of May, one of these Putins gave a very long and good video address to his Chinese friends, where, excuse me, when I watched all of this unfold, I didn't really see the real Putin there at all. Instead, I saw a big, incredibly rough tongue licking absolutely everything Chinese. Well, and quite probably, President Xi Jinping himself ended up being included in that display too. That is, it was all about how Russia admires, loves, respects, in short, will do anything for China. Just help us. On the 20th, there was a man in China who looked very much like Putin. This man was also at the parade on May 9th this year.
There's a lot more interesting stuff in that interview. Dmitry Popov shared it with my colleagues from the In the Crosshairs project. Be sure to watch it. Even critics of the theory about Putin's doubles noticed his very swollen face in Beijing on May 20th. This raised a lot of questions. Compared to footage from May 18th, there are noticeable differences, particularly in the shape of the face, the contour of the neck, and the prominence of age-related changes. Our colleagues from Telegraph turned to artificial intelligence to analyze Putin's appearance and how it changes in just a few days. The digital intelligence emphasized that the visual difference between the footage from China on May 19th and 20th and Putin's address from the Kremlin on May 18th is very noticeable. So, in the recent photos, let's take a look. The effect of a puffy face is clearly visible. You see the Russian leader's cheeks look unnaturally round, sagging from below, so to speak, and shifted toward the jawline. Because of this, there's a noticeable visual effect of a swollen, rounded face, which is sometimes associated with fluid retention in the body, or, for example, with the effects of medication, cosmetic procedures, or alcohol. If this is a body double, why not? Pay special attention to Putin's chin and neck. In these shots, you can see that the shirt collar is literally digging into his neck, making it look swollen and massive. Meanwhile, the lower part of his face appears less defined, as if it's lost its clear contours. Look, there are visible folds in the neck and chin area. Artificial intelligence also noticed a strange detail in his facial expressions. In these shots, Putin makes an unusual grimace. Here, he's trying to purse his lips. This highlights an unnatural fullness, specifically in the lower part of his cheeks. Comparing the photos with previous ones, artificial intelligence immediately notices that in the footage from May 18th, where Putin is delivering an address from the Kremlin, his face has a completely different, more elongated and gaunt structure. Here, his face has a more defined oval shape. There is no swelling in the cheeks. In addition, Putin's neck looks thinner here, yes, and you can notice this by the collar of his shirt, which sits loosely and doesn't squeeze his neck like it does in the photos from China. So what's going on with Putin? That's what the journalists from the Telegraph asked artificial intelligence. The AI explained such changes in the Kremlin leader's appearance by several possible factors at once. The first one is medical or cosmetic. Putin could have been injected with a significant dose of medications. This could be to maintain his tone or with cosmetic fillers in preparation for his meeting with Xi Jinping. It certainly reminds one of how geishas were once prepared for visits from the emperor. The fact is that during many foreign visits, it is not always possible to fully control the camera angles, as the Kremlin press service usually does. That's why his team could, of course, have resorted to cosmetic procedures, which ultimately resulted in this kind of swelling that subsided during the flight and due to the change in climate. The second version to me actually seems more plausible. A Putin double arrived in China. Artificial intelligence has noted that the office-bound Putin has completely different skull proportions and neck posture, while in the footage from Beijing, the so-called chewed-up, or puffy version, as it is also called, is sitting there. This Putin has a wider lower jaw and a tendency for chin swelling under stress or due to medication. Of course, you might reasonably ask why they sent a double to such an important event. After all, I agree with you here. Xi is not the obsequious Lukashenko who would play along with any double. Let a psychologist answer that question as well. Because, well, if you notice, when Putin got off the plane, there were I counted about 9 bodyguards who accompanied him in China. So look, China is currently one of the most friendly countries to the Russian Federation, if you can even say that Russia has any friends at all. And even there were 9 bodyguards. So in this case, the person has a very strong fear for his own life. And of course, at the parade in Moscow on May 9th, there's no point in bringing out the real one either. What if a drone comes, or a Webb, or a Maloik, or Budanov, and they do something directly to this double? So there are these constant paranoid threats looming everywhere. And because of that, there is really no logical point or even a slight desire for the real person to go out and handle things himself anymore, as it simply isn't worth the risk or the effort. Once again, I remind you, check out our project In the Crosshairs. It's worth it. By the way, Dmitry Popov also talks about Xi's psychological superiority over Putin and over Trump. It's hard to disagree here, considering how he toyed with them. Here are at least a few examples. Let's start with the meeting. Do you really think that children just happen to jump around in ecstasy in front of Trump, who is mired in Epstein's pedophilia scandal, and the Kremlin maniac who kisses children's bellies on camera and has long had a reputation as a pedophile? Teenagers? Nothing happens by accident in China. This is a session of humiliation. Right in front of Trump, it's a clear message about what they think of him. And in Trump's case, it's also a demonstration that he is being equated with Putin. Well, of course, the latter got it even worse at the start. Even before the visit, purely by chance, absolutely by chance, information leaked to the press that during the meeting in Beijing, Xi Jinping told Donald Trump that Putin might regret invading Ukraine. Remember? So who do you think did that? Definitely China. Let's read between the lines what else was being sent as a message to Putin. Pina, before only Moscow knew that you were a fool and a moth. Now the whole world knows, and we certainly do. And we know that without us, you're finished, and you're coming to beg us to help you continue the war. Now you know that you'll have to pay a very high price for that. To reinforce these conclusions in Putin's mind, during the ceremonial reception in Beijing, the famous Dance of the Little Swans from Tchaikovsky's ballet was performed. And this is a very eloquent gesture from Xi Jinping, considering that Swan Lake is regarded as a symbol of political chaos and major upheavals in the Russian Federation. Remember, it used to be played on Soviet TV whenever another leader was dying. And during the attempted coup in 1991, Ostankino suddenly cut off the broadcast and started showing this ballet continuously instead of the news. That's why this Putin lookalike is so humbly groveling before the leader of China. What price Xi has set, we will see very soon. I'm sure it's no longer just about cheap energy resources. Most likely, they'll hand over the remaining military technologies that interest China, if of course any are left. But more likely, we'll see the trading of Russian territories. Very soon, Putin will repeat the experience of Catherine the Great, who gave Alaska to America. He too will soon start handing over very attractive pieces to China for temporary administration. And then, as usually happens, the temporary will very quickly become permanent. I can even predict which territories these will be. It's not difficult. After all, back in 2023, if you remember, China renamed Russian cities on its maps. And now the new version of the world map restores Chinese names for 8 cities and territories. They were annexed by the Russian Empire back in the 19th century. We can only wish the residents of Vladivostok, Sakhalin Island, Blagoveshchensk, Khabarovsk, and apparently Ussurisk as well, to start studying Chinese very seriously. Here, it's worth pausing to consider how the results of the Xi and Putin meeting will affect Ukraine. And I have two pieces of news here. One is not very good, the other is not the worst. Beijing will help the bunker dweller. Let me explain why. As long as this war benefits Xi Jinping, it weakens the Russian Federation. China is slowly but surely devouring Russia, and without much effort, because Putin, in order to save himself, is serving it up piece by piece on a silver platter. That's the only reason he's useful to Beijing, because when else would a neighbor be so stupid and incompetent that he would first drive his own country to ruin and then basically hand it over without a fight? And this is where the not-so-bad news for us lies. A Russian victory isn't in Beijing's interest either. There would be fewer benefits from it. And while that may sound somewhat reassuring for Kyiv, for Europe, it should be anything but comforting. It seems to me that Xi could have set a very high price for his support to Putin. This is a new war, a war in Europe, or at the very least, a very serious threat of such a war. What does China gain from this? Exactly what the United States has spent the last century fighting for, the preservation of Imperial Russia, the USSR, and the Russian Federation. It is Europe's fear of the Russian bear, armed, brutish, and perpetually drunk. The scheme worked roughly like this. You don't have to fear your unruly neighbor as long as we guarantee your security, which you will pay for economically or politically. But now it's obvious that Trump has already flushed this scheme down the toilet and won't step in to defend it. And NATO will once again express concern, fail in negotiations over countermeasures, and commit organizational suicide. And that's when this new guarantor of security, China, will step onto the stage, say no to Putin. Putin will immediately back off, and Xi will, open up this umbrella of nuclear security over Europe. They'll be glad, of course. After all, they don't care who protects them from the Russian boot, as long as they can quickly return to their infantile past and go on living carefreely. You probably think this is a conspiracy theory. But pay attention. It's no coincidence that Putin is now openly brandishing nuclear weapons and threatening the world with unpredictable consequences. Notice that before Moscow used nuclear blackmail only against Ukraine, but now the Kremlin is already threatening that the nuclear exercises in Belarus are a signal to NATO. The Ministry of Defense of the Russian Republic of Belarus even stated that, as part of the exercises, Russia has already delivered nuclear warheads to field storage sites on Belarusian territory and even published a corresponding video there. Russian news agencies reported that during the nuclear forces exercises in Belarus, Iskander-M systems with special warheads were deployed, and Putin and Lukashenko conducted a so-called joint training of the nuclear forces of Russia and Belarus. By the way, this duo observed the exercise together, but via video link. It's safer that way, isn't it? Even the masters themselves, as we can see, prefer to keep their distance from the unpredictable Russian counterpart in NATO. Well, it's understandable. Notice how those who threaten the world are themselves afraid. Just look at how scared they are. The potato Führer, in my opinion, has completely botched the entire special operation. Well, let's take a look ourselves at this thief who launches nukes. This is very amusing.
With your permission, please proceed according to the procedure, just like you did before. Yes, sir. To the Division Commander, target 10201, readiness 1. Crew, prepare for battle. Chief of Staff, assign the target. Ready. So, we're striking with the Iskander, right? Yes, it's already underway. Now the Iskander is stuck. He won't see it.
Pay attention to his face. His face is so red, he's on the verge of a heart attack or a stroke, and the old man is genuinely scared. That's exactly why, against the backdrop of exercises with nuclear Iskanders, he stated that he is not going to get involved in the war with Ukraine, and is ready to meet with Zelensky anywhere, even in Ukraine. What do you think? He's restless for a reason, because he's never been stretched this thin before. Look, on one hand, Putin needs to drag him into the war. And it's not necessarily against Ukraine, as I said. And after 4 years of Lukashenko's maneuvering, the patience of the Moscow killer is about to run out. He could easily treat his Minsk colleague to some tea with polonium or, for example, kidnap him like Maduro. On the other hand, Zelensky is tugging at Lukashenko's whiskers with statements that the leadership of Belarus needs to stay alert and understand that there will be consequences if they take aggressive actions against Ukraine, and then he even warns about preventive measures against Belarus. Preventive measures. What do you think of this turn of history? It feels as if the cards Lukashenko used to cover himself at the start of the full-scale invasion have come back to him like a boomerang. And who knows, maybe as soon as tomorrow, Chersky or Zelensky will be explaining certain events with words like, "And I'll show you where the attack was being prepared from." Putin is looking at some very grim cards right now. Cards showing the arrival of Ukrainian sanctions. Just in the past week, the Lukoil oil refinery in the Nizhny Novgorod region, near the settlement of Kshtovo, there was a very large fire raging there. In numerous videos filmed by locals, you can see columns of smoke in the sky and open flames at the plant. Let me remind you, this is one of the leading oil refineries in Russia. It is very important for supplying the Moscow region, and Syzran was burning too. Yes, every night a couple of sites are visited by Ukrainian drones and missiles. And the president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, has already announced that he has approved plans for long-range strikes on Russia for the month of June. Things are also bad in the temporarily occupied territories. For example, the Special Operations Center of the Security Service of Ukraine attacked the temporarily occupied territory of the Kherson region with long-range drones. As a result of the attack, the headquarters of the Russian Federal Security Service was destroyed, along with an entire Pantsir anti-aircraft missile and gun system, and more than 100 Russian intelligence officers were eliminated. Let me remind you that earlier, the UAV forces of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, together with the Security Service of Ukraine, destroyed the pilot training school of the Russian Academy of Rocket and Artillery Sciences. What do you think of these results? The situation is no better on the front lines. For example, in the Velikoboluk direction, Ukrainian forces have pushed the Russians back to the border. In a month, the occupiers lost 2 settlements there, and they have effectively been pushed back to the state border. But the situation in the Zaporizhzhia region looks downright shameful. Remember how they boasted and threatened to reach Berlin, to reach Paris? But on the way, they ran into Malotokmachka. For a year now, the occupiers have been unsuccessfully storming a small village in the Zaporizhzhia region. Ukraine's permanent representative to the UN, Andriy Melnik, very ironically compared the Russians' attempts to capture the settlement to the siege of Rome or Carthage, and reminded everyone how, for years, Russian commentators have repeatedly declared that they had almost taken the settlement, but still have not managed to do so. This demonstrates the gap between propagandist statements and the actual situation. Let's have you see for yourself how this triumph of victory mania has unfolded and continues to unfold in Russia. Well, actually, it's not happening there at all, but to understand, pay attention to the dates.
In the Zaporizhzhia direction, our troops have achieved certain successes. In the area of Malotokmachka, heavy fighting and battles also continue to take place on the outskirts and in the surrounding areas of Malotokmachka. Fighting continues for Malotokmachka, where our troops have made significant advances. They are also pushing forward and battling for control of the town's southeastern part. The assault on Malotokmachka continues. There are also advances in the area of Malotokmachka. There are also battles near Malotokmachka.
And after all, this disgrace is being seen all over the world. Well, for example, Bill writes that Putin is losing the war on 3 fronts at once. The German publication concluded that the war of attrition is gradually becoming a serious problem for the Kremlin. The first problem is the losses of the Russian army. According to Western estimates, Russia loses about 35,000 soldiers killed and wounded every month, and total losses since the beginning of the war are already estimated at 1.5 million people. Problem number 2 is the situation at the front. For the first time in a long while, Russia has started losing more territory than it is capturing. Since the beginning of 2026, the Russian army has occupied about 220 square kilometers, while Ukraine has regained approximately 189. And problem number 3, the war is coming to Russia itself. Ukrainian drones are striking oil refineries, military infrastructure, and targets deep in the rear more and more often, including areas near Moscow. For many Russians, the war is being felt for the first time not just on television, writes Bild. And here, something almost miraculous is happening. It seems that Russians are starting to get it, an awakening right in the swamps. This time, the baton is being picked up near Yaroslavl by residents following those in Tuapse and Perm. And now, in addition to the usual, we didn't think this would affect us, other conclusions are being voiced. This is worth watching and listening to.
I just opened up the internet, specifically checking Instagram, and I saw that several drones had recently hit the major oil refinery located in Yaroslavl. I live in a city 40 kilometers from that plant, well, maybe 50 kilometers. And to be perfectly honest, I am really quite scared. What's happening now is really no joke anymore. If before, when it was somewhere far away, you'd think, okay. But here, just 50 kilometers away, they blew up a huge plant. So, it was the sudden, sobering realization that this situation is absolutely no longer just a simple joke. It could really hit home, and that's honestly terrifying. And even when the sirens go off, the warnings, we don't have any shelters in the city, just so you understand. The city has a population of 45,000. So, where are we supposed to run? We don't have basements, we don't have shelters, we basically have nothing at all. If that drone happens to crash right into your apartment, then it's entirely on you. Consequently, every single one of the repair costs will be your personal responsibility, and the government isn't obligated to pay for it. Do you get the point? The absurdity of the whole situation? You know who started the war, who stirred all this up. And if a drone hits your home, you have to deal with it yourself. Forget it, because what is even happening? What's going on? They just destroyed everything, ruined the country. Ukraine is already gone, now they're coming after us. It's honestly terrifying. You know yourself who's responsible. It's us, ordinary people. You're the one responsible, you started all this. What do we have to do with it? Why do ordinary people always have to suffer? That's all I have nothing else, I don't know what else to say.
You see, treatment with drones isn't hopeless after all, and flashes of reason are starting to visit Putin's subjects. What's most unpleasant for the bunker grandpa is that this is already happening within the Golden Ring, and from there, the Kremlin is just a stone's throw away. Well, after that, everything will be short and clear, but very painful. Thank you for watching. See you next time.